Knowing how you feel and how you've set the pace out here today, if we look at your alliance with the government, surely hypocrisy is taking place by you still being part of an alliance that is practicing what you're condemning it for. How can you be in bed with an alliance like that?
We're in bed with the ANC.
Yeah,
the ANC's policies are the Freedom Charter. The ANC comes from Polokwane. It's a conference 8 years ago where it adopted policies of greater industrialization, greater beneficiation, exactly the stuff we're talking about, where it moved and nearly condemned the gear policy of Thabo Mbeki and said we've got to have a more interventionist state, we've got to deal with the issues that confronts us. The President in his State of the Nation talks now about the triple challenges, unemployment, poverty and inequality. Before we didn't hear about those things, we heard about how great the market was doing, and that was the fundamental mantra of where our country was going. At least now poor people are on the agenda. No other political party in South Africa can advance the plight of poor people the way that the ANC can. So our alliance is both born out of the history between Cosatu and the ANC, but also the pragmatic realization that this is a party where the game's at in South Africa.
You can't be all things to all people at all time. I understand your alliance with the ANC to achieve where you've gone, but aren't you reaching the time now where Cosatu, and it's whispered in corridors and you know that it is, you break away from the ANC and you become a socialist Cosatu party on its own?
The Freedom Charter is probably the most socialist program of any political party across the world.
Yeah, but is that a yes or a no? Is it not true that that's really what you're heading towards?
Well, you're asking me about my personal view. My personal view is that we're better off with the ANC in alliance. It's a more pragmatic relationship to build a new party with all of the structures. And our members have said in surveys that we've done, the majority of our members have said, close on to 80%, that when they were asked whether they'd support a workers' party or support the ANC, they'd support the ANC. The ANC is immensely popular. We must fight for the direction that the ANC takes. And we've won those battles. Part of the ousting of Mbeki is about the strength of the left wing in the ANC. Sure, there was a coming together of a lot of different forces with the ousting of Mbeki around Zuma, but a lot of the policy direction that emerged in that big changes was policy positions pushed by Cosatu. So we're able to influence the agenda, we're able to get a program. We certainly won't get that with the DA, we won't get that with the IFP or any other. And none of these parties will ever be the game in town. The game in South Africa is the ANC. It will be for the next 20 years at least. So that's where we're able to influence the agenda, and that's the Cosatu strategic agenda. The final point is that Cosatu is a democratic organization. At the National Congress, where more than 2,000 Cosatu members come together, representing over 2 million members across the length and breadth of this country, they've given a mandate that the alliance must be strengthened. So no leader can say, well, we want to break the alliance now. That's the decision of the members. The leaders' obligations are to give expression to that decision.
Isn't the bottom line, Tony, and this is a very friendly thing that I'm saying to you now, isn't the bottom line that the world is sick and tired of politicians, bankers and attorneys?
They should be, if the products that bankers, politicians and attorneys have brought them is the product that we see today. Growing levels of inequality, an economy that's not getting out of the mess that it's in, and poor people paying with it.
Isn't that the true anger in the world, the majority?
Sure, I think that they're part of the elites. The politicians have become part of the wealthy elite who've misrepresented what we need to do in the economy. There are working people who become comfortable in life. There are people who are the idle elite, who haven't worked a day in their lives. Their fathers or grandfathers stole under apartheid, and they're still happily surfing along on that wealth. Whether it was land, whether it was contracts that they got with the apartheid government. There was always a move, much like you see the corruption now, it happened under apartheid. The elites have constructed themselves at the cost of the poor. The country only has so much wealth. If it was distributed a lot more fairly, we'd have a much more stable, better country. Why doesn't countries like Norway, that has an incredible oil reserves, that take that oil reserves, nationalizes it, and use it in the public interest? Why can't we do the same with our raw materials? What I think we must be looking at is how do we use the immense reserves that we have in our country more strategically in the interest of the poor. So let's not give black politically connected people 25% of the share options in companies. Let's force those companies to invest in building more companies that adds value and create more jobs in that. That's the kind of interventions that I think the state must be doing in a lot of the
I
raw
think
materials
where
we
you're
have.
heading is education of tomorrow's leaders.
Well, we've got to change the leadership orientation to make sure that there's a different sense of ethics and values in them. There's no doubt that many of the leaders who are today on the bandwagon to enrich themselves would lay down their lives for them people. How did they so quickly become corrupted? Because there's, I think, an orchestrated, clear benefit. And once you're entrenched in that lap of luxury, you nearly think that you're entitled to it. And once that's happened, you lost to the people. That's why we've got to make sure that democratic elections replace people more often, that we don't have leaders who stay too long, that we give leaders good retirement packages, but we don't give them actual good packages. They must live amongst their constituencies. They must earn similar wages to an artisan or a teacher or something else. They must be part of the society. When they retire, they can be taken care of, but not while they're serving people in advancing the public good.
Last item before we finish our interview with you, it concerns you running for the mayor of Cape Town. Some years ago, it was an ANC-controlled area. It was a failure, maybe because of the inability of people to do the jobs that they got into and they weren't capable of them. Do you now see yourself, the ANC, as a party capable of taking over the Western Cape again, and of course Cape Town as well, and running it without all the problems that exist already and existed in your time before as well?
Absolutely. One of the most important things we've got to do in the city, because nothing has changed fundamentally that was done out of the tax base. The rates in Cape Town, all that does is really maintains the status quo. The big changes we've seen, the IRT bus system, the stadium, the investment in infrastructure, whether it's RDP housing or other things, all of those things come from national grants and national funds. Those things
Partially.
No, in the main, all of those, the IRT completely funded by national government through the Department of Transport. You can go and double check that. So all of these mega projects that is held up as great successes are national government projects. Whether it was the ANC or the DA in charge, that would have happened. There would have been a fundamental difference if I was the mayor. We would not have started the rollout of the IRT buses in Milnerton and Bootesag. We would have started in Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain, where people are more desperately dependent on public transport. We would have got to Milnerton, but that would have been the second phase, not the first phase. So the priorities would have been slightly different, but the way that it happens clearly has to be. But the one thing I think we must agree that all of us must do in this country, anyone who's guilty of corruption must go straight to jail. There must be a zero tolerance approach towards them, because that is causing not only the undermining of the ANC or the DA, because both sides have their corrupt individuals. It's letting the social fabric of the society come apart, and it's making people look for different ways to express their anger. And that's a threat to everybody in this country, not only to poor people.
One of the problems is that nobody's willing to name and shame.
Well, I think we're getting there. I think that we've seen for the first time the president taking actions against ministers. Sicelo Sitsega was kicked out of government partly because of corruption. So we've seen some action taken. We've seen, no, there's been more than one. There's a DG who was fired, there's a number, there's Cosatu.
But no big fish.
Well, the minister, in my view, is a pretty big fish. There's Cosatu Corruption Watch. There's independent institutions that are challenging people. But we've got to make sure that the attitude against corruption comes out. Whether it's the president hasn't been found guilty. But if the president's found guilty, then he must stand to account for that. But he hasn't been found guilty as we sit here today. And we've got to respect the separation between the judiciary and what happens in government.
Business in this country is necessary for our economy. Business sees you as the devil on their shoulder.
Well, business,
not you personally, I'm talking about
the unions, no doubt.
Collectively, yeah.
The business has got to understand that the democracy that we built, the democracy that has meant that they've been able to maintain what they stole under apartheid, had an assumption built into it. That assumption was that workers' rights is an important part of the human rights culture we're going to build in South Africa. and that wage negotiations are really one of the only redistributive mechanisms. How do we move money from the elites to the poor in the business world? We do that through wage negotiations, by a more fair spread of the profits that are generated by both of the parties. So that's a necessary part of the system in South Africa. That's part of a global phenomena. But business in South Africa must also be held to account. What's the example that we see? We've seen collusion and corruption in bread prices, milk prices, chicken prices, all protein for the poor. We've seen collusion in, we're probably going to find it in the IRT bus route that's built, in the stadium construction. So business has shown themselves to be incredibly corrupt.
Now,
as part of apartheid, but as part of the new system. We have to address that also. I'm starting to say that the way our institutions function and the way that the business environment functions is a corrupt one by its nature. We're starting to change that. The Companies Act is meant to address that. This is not where even the tendering issues are the matter. On the collusion around bread prices, the directors of the big companies came together. So you don't tender there, and they've set prices together that's led to them overcharging poor people in the main who depend on bread. So there's a lot of mechanisms in the law that we've got to address. Part of that is being addressed. But the point that I want to make, it is neither one nor the other. We've got to accept that in South Africa, if we're going to all go forward, we've got to build a society that's more just, that's more fair, that's more equal, and that gives everybody the space where through hard work and application, they'll get ahead. At the moment, those who have the advantage, in the main the white communities, are defending that advantage and trying to keep out the others in a range of different ways. I can tell you in the business insurance industry, do you think black companies get to provide the panel beating or the replacing of the hot water cylinders it burns, or do the maintenance to insurance whether your wiring's got burnt? Those in the main is the old white boys networks. They get the jobs, they subcontracted to the black contractors, and those guys pick up the workers on the street corner to go and do it. So there's a lot of money in the economy, but the money is not being channeled in a way that is fair and just and giving people decent job opportunities. The guys at the top are taking the slices in the system as it worked before. And that has got to be addressed. But their solution to it has been my final point. The solution to the white corruption that existed under apartheid, and that continues in part as that they've been joined by a black corrupt class. Whereas the solution should have been to undo the corruption for everybody, to build the systems more fair. This country will only survive with black and white, with rich and poor. But unless we do that in a partnership that's sustainable, the partnership we have now is not sustainable because black people are out of the loop. They're angry at what they see on the other side. We've got to find a different way to deal with it. I think it's possible in South Africa. I think there are a lot of people of goodwill and a lot of people who realize the crisis. But there are still those who think we must just hold on to what we've got. Things are going to be okay. The government will send in the army or the police to quell the hoarding masses. It's not happened in other countries. It's not going to happen here.